The world of Vora 9 was falling apart. The skies were red and full of ash. The ground split open with deep cracks that swallowed whole cities. Once it had been home to a proud race, the Vulpines, fox-like beings with golden eyes and soft, glowing fur. They were known for their beauty, their intelligence, and their cold logic. When their world began to die, they built great ships to escape into the stars. Among the crowd waiting at the launch site was a small Vulpine girl named Lyra. Her fur was a pale silver, her eyes wide and full of light. She was only 14 in human years, young and fragile but full of hope. She stood near the boarding ramp, clutching a small metallic pendant, her mother's last gift. Her family had gone ahead to help with preparations. They had promised they would come back for her, but they never did. As the alarms wailed and the ground began to shake, the last transport shuttles started to lift off. Lyra ran forward, shouting their names. Her voice broke in the thick smoke. The soldiers guarding the ramp stopped her. One of them, tall and expressionless, pushed her back. "No more boarding," he said flatly. "This pod is at full capacity. But my family," she cried. They said they'd come for me." The soldier's tail flicked once in discomfort, but he didn't move. "Orders are orders. Step back." Lyra's world crumbled. She tried to slip past, but another guard blocked her. The engines roared. The ship began to rise. Through the glass window she saw faces, familiar ones. Her mother, her older brother. They looked down at her, faces tight with guilt and fear. Her brother raised a hand as if to say, "I'm sorry," and then the ship was gone. The thunder of the engines faded into the burning sky. Lyra stood frozen, her chest heaving, her pendant trembling in her grip. The air smelled of smoke and metal. The silence that followed was heavier than any sound she had ever known. She screamed. She screamed until her voice cracked, until her knees gave out and she fell onto the scorched ground. She kept looking up at the sky, hoping the ships would turn back. But they didn't, none of them did. Days passed. The launch site became empty, only wreckage and echoing wind. Lyra stayed there, sleeping under broken walls and shattered glass. She searched the ruins for food, ate whatever she could find. Dried rations, rainwater from old pipes. Her fur turned gray from dust. Her hands were always shaking. Every night she lit a small fire and stared up at the stars. She wondered which one her family was under now. Did they think of her? Did they feel any guilt? Or had they already forgotten? The loneliness ate at her heart like poison. Sometimes she spoke out loud just to hear her own voice. "Mama, I'm still here," she would whisper. "I'm still waiting." Once she found a small recording device near the wreckage of a comms unit. She pressed the play button, and a distorted voice came through. Her mother's voice, panicked, saying, "Lyra, if you hear this, run to the launch zone. We'll be there." Then static. She replayed it again and again until the battery died. After that, she carried it with her everywhere. It was the only thing that proved she hadn't imagined them. Weeks turned into months. The storms grew worse. The air became heavy with toxins. Lyra's once bright fur dulled to a dirty gray, her eyes dim with hunger and exhaustion. Yet she refused to leave the valley near the launch site. She couldn't. It was the last place they had seen her. In her mind, if she stayed there, maybe one day they would come back. Sometimes she saw shapes in the distance, machines or scavengers. She hid whenever she heard engines. Not all who landed on dying worlds were kind, but deep inside she kept one spark alive, the spark of waiting. The tiny, foolish hope that someone would see her, that someone somewhere would stop. One morning the sky turned gold with sunrise. Lyra stood at the edge of the ruins, weak but standing tall. Her pendant caught the light, gleaming faintly like a star against her chest. The wind brushed her fur, whispering through the silence. And far above, through the thick clouds, a new sound broke the endless quiet. The deep rumble of engines. A ship was descending. Lyra's heart pounded. Her tail flicked. For a long time she had given up believing anyone would come. But now, as the dust swirled around her and metal gleamed in the dawn, she felt something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. She didn't know it yet. But that ship carried a human. And for the first time since her people left, she was about to meet someone who wouldn't look away. The human salvage ship Atlas 7 broke through the clouds of Vora 9 with a growl of engines. Its hull was old and scratched from years of work, but its heart, its captain, was steady and kind. Captain Elias Rourke, a man in his late 30s with a scar down one cheek and tired blue eyes, had seen more broken worlds than most soldiers ever would. But he still believed that even in ruins there was something worth saving. Atlas 7 had come to Vora 9 for metals and scrap. The old cities were full of valuable alloys from Vulpine technology. The planet was listed as uninhabited in the registry. No signals, no survivors, at least that's what the scanner said. Elias and his small crew of 5 landed near the edge of a destroyed city. The air shimmered with heat, and tall, twisted buildings reached up like black fingers toward the orange sky. "Let's make it quick," said Tanner, the engineer, as he checked his oxygen mask. "The storms here are nasty." Elias nodded but looked around with quiet sadness. This was someone's home once. They began their work, collecting metal, marking locations for drone scans. Hours passed. The wind howled through the ruins. Then Elias's scanner beeped. A small red dot appeared on the map, a heat source. Tanner frowned. Probably a malfunction. Nothing's supposed to be alive here. But Elias didn't dismiss it. "Let's check it out," he said simply. They followed the signal through cracked streets and broken glass until they reached what looked like an old transport station. The walls were covered in soot and the roof had half collapsed. The scanner pinged again. The signal was close. Inside. Elias turned on his helmet light and stepped carefully over the rubble. "Hello?" he called out softly. His voice echoed faintly. At first there was no answer. Then something moved in the shadows, a flicker of silver fur. Tanner swore under his breath and raised his rifle. "Captain, something's there!" Elias held out a hand. "Don't shoot." Slowly, from behind a piece of metal, a small figure crawled into view. It was a girl, thin, trembling, her fur matted with dirt. Her golden eyes glowed faintly in the dim light. She looked terrified. Elias froze. He had seen Vulpines before, but never like this. Never so broken, so fragile. "Hey," he said gently, lowering his weapon. "It's okay. I won't hurt you," Lyra hissed, her ears flat against her head. Her claws were dull, but she raised them anyway, ready to defend herself. She didn't understand his words, but she recognized his tone. It wasn't like the soldiers who had pushed her away. It was soft, human. Elias slowly crouched down and placed a ration pack on the ground. Then he backed away a few steps. "Food," he said quietly, pointing to it. Lyra looked at the pack, then at him. Hunger battled fear in her eyes. After a long moment, she crawled forward and tore the pack open. The smell of meat made her stomach growl. She ate quickly, almost desperately, as if afraid he would take it back. Tanner whispered, "Captain, we can't take her. She's an alien." Command isn't here," Elias cut him off. His voice was firm but kind. "We are." He watched as Lyra ate, his heart aching. She looked so young, so lost. Her tail was thin from starvation, her fur patchy. He knew what abandonment looked like. He had seen it on Earth, too, in war zones and refugee camps. It didn't matter if she had fur or skin. Pain was pain. When she was done eating, she looked up at him cautiously. Elias smiled a little and tapped his chest. "Elias," he said, pointing to himself. She tilted her head. "Elias." He nodded, his smile widening. Then he pointed at her. "You?" She blinked, unsure at first. Then she placed a shaky hand on her chest. "Lyra." The sound of her name in her own voice almost made her cry. It had been so long since anyone had asked. That night, Elias made a small fire outside the station. Lyra sat nearby, wrapped in one of his spare blankets, staring into the flames. The warmth made her eyes glisten. She had forgotten what it felt like to be safe, even for a few minutes. Tanner muttered something about extra mouths to feed, but Elias ignored him. He just sat quietly beside her. When the wind blew, she shivered and moved closer to the fire. Elias took off his jacket and placed it gently over her shoulders. She looked up at him in surprise, her ears twitching. He didn't say anything. He just smiled again, that small, tired smile that carried more kindness than any words could. And for the first time since her family had left, Lyra didn't cry herself to sleep. The days that followed were quiet but full of change. Lyra stayed close to the human camp, though she didn't fully trust anyone except Elias. The first night she had slept outside his tent, wrapped in his spare blanket, her ears twitching at every sound. She was scared of the strange metal machines and the harsh smell of oil. Yet when she saw Elias in the morning, offering her a warm cup of water and a soft smile, some of her fear faded away. The humans watched her with mixed feelings. Tanner, the engineer, complained often. "Captain, she's slowing us down," he muttered. "We came here for salvage, not charity." Elias just gave him a tired look. "We came here to take what's left from a dead world," he said quietly. "But if we leave a living being behind, then maybe we're the ones who are dead inside." No one argued after that. Lyra didn't understand their words, but she understood their tones. Elias's voice was always calm, gentle, even when others were sharp or loud. When she made mistakes, he didn't yell. He only smiled and showed her again. That was how she began to learn. At first, she spoke very little. Her tongue stumbled over human words, and she mixed sounds awkwardly. But Elias was patient. Every evening after the crew finished their work, he sat with her near the fire. He would point to things, say their names, and wait for her to repeat. "Water," he said, holding up his canteen. "Water," she echoed, her accent soft and careful. He smiled. "Good. Food." He pointed to a ration pack. "Food," she said again, this time with more confidence. Her golden eyes lit up every time she got a word right. It made Elias feel something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. One night, as the fire flickered low, she tried to say his name. "Elias," she whispered. He looked up from his datapad, smiling gently. "That's me," she pointed to herself. "Lyra," she said proudly. "I know," he said softly. Lyra. The way he said her name was different. He didn't say it like the Vulpines had, with cold distance or duty. He said it like it meant something, like she mattered. Over time, Lyra began to help the crew. She was small and quick, perfect for crawling into tight spaces where others couldn't fit. She gathered supplies, cleaned equipment, and even learned how to use the small scanner to detect metal. Every evening she brought Elias a few pieces of scrap and smiled shyly. He always thanked her, no matter how small the find. Slowly, the crew started to accept her. Even Tanner softened a bit, joking that she was the fastest fox he'd ever seen. Lyra didn't understand the joke, but she laughed anyway because Elias laughed too. Still, there were nights when she couldn't sleep. She would sit alone, staring at the stars above. Sometimes tears filled her eyes and her tail wrapped tightly around her legs. She missed her family, the voices that once comforted her, the gentle warmth of her mother's fur. But when she looked back and saw the humans sleeping in their tents, she felt something new, a strange, quiet belonging. One evening, a storm rolled over the camp. The wind howled and the rain came down hard. The humans hurried to secure the equipment. Lyra tried to help, but the thunder scared her. She dropped a tool and covered her ears, trembling. Elias noticed. He ran to her, kneeling down. Hey, it's okay," he said softly, even though she barely understood the words. He took her hand and guided her into the shelter. The moment they stepped inside, she hugged him tightly, her small body shaking. For a second, he froze. Then he gently wrapped his arms around her. "It's all right," he whispered. "You're safe now." Those words, even though she didn't know every meaning, touched her deeply. She could feel what he meant through the way his voice softened, through the warmth in his hands. When the storm passed, the camp was quiet again. Lyra sat near the fire, wrapped in his jacket, watching the sky clear. She looked at Elias and whispered in broken English, "You good?" He chuckled, rubbing his neck awkwardly. "I try to be." Lyra smiled, a real full smile that reached her golden eyes. It was the first time since her family had left that she truly felt alive. From that day on, she stopped calling him just Elias. She began calling him Captain, like the others did. And every time she said it, he felt a weight lift from his heart, because in that ruined world, among broken machines and ashes, two lost souls had found something worth saving: each other. A full year had passed since Elias and his crew had found Lyra among the ruins. In that time, the barren land of Vora 9 had begun to change, just a little. The humans had built small shelters, solar towers, and repair bays filled with scavenged machines. The camp had turned into a small living outpost surrounded by red dust and quiet hope. Lyra had changed too. Her fur was brighter now, soft again, and her eyes no longer looked lost. She had learned many human words and even a few jokes. She liked to walk beside Elias when he inspected the work, her tail swaying slowly, her ears twitching at every sound. "Lyra," Elias called one morning as he looked over the drone reports. "You're getting good at this." We might make an engineer out of you yet. She grinned proudly. Engi, near. Like Tanner? He chuckled. Maybe better than Tanner. From across the camp, Tanner pretended to glare. Hey, I heard that, he shouted, but there was laughter in his voice. Even the crew had grown fond of the Vulpine girl who had once been afraid of her own shadow. But behind Lyra's smile, a small ache still lived in her heart. At night, she often climbed the metal tower outside the camp and looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, her people were traveling between worlds, strong, proud, and alive. They had left her behind, but a part of her still missed them. She wanted to believe that maybe one day they would return. That day came sooner than anyone expected. It started with a signal. A faint ping on the long-range scanner. Tanner almost ignored it, thinking it was interference. But the pattern repeated, clear and deliberate. Captain, he said, turning toward Elias, you should see this. It's Vulpine code. Elias froze. Lyra, who had been cleaning tools nearby, looked up immediately. Vulpine? She whispered. He nodded. Looks like one of their ships entered orbit. Lyra's heart pounded. Her ears stood straight, her tail flicked anxiously. For the first time in a long while, her golden eyes shone not with sadness, but hope. Within hours, a shadow appeared in the sky. Sleek, silver, and beautiful. The Vulpine vessel descended slowly, its thrusters cutting through the dust. The humans gathered outside the camp, their rifles ready, though Elias motioned for them to lower them. No one fires unless I say, he ordered. The ship landed with a deep hum and its doors opened with a hiss of steam. From within stepped 3 Vulpines, tall and elegant, their armor polished and eyes sharp. Their fur shimmered under the sunlight, pure white and gold. They looked like the ghosts of a world long gone. Lyra stood frozen, halfway between running forward and running away. Her heart ached to see them. The leader, a male with deep blue eyes, stepped forward. Survivors, he said in their native tongue. We detected life signs here. I did not expect humans, Elias nodded politely. We found one of yours, he said, motioning to Lyra. The Vulpine leader's ears twitched. His gaze turned to her. For a moment his expression softened. You survived, he said slowly. Lyra's voice trembled as she replied in their tongue. You left me. There was silence. Even the wind seemed to stop. The leader's tail flicked once. We could not wait. The planet was dying. You were presumed lost, presumed. Her voice rose. I waited. I called for you. You saw me. Tears began to shine in her eyes. You looked down and still left. The other Vulpines looked away, uncomfortable, but the leader stayed cold. The mission was clear. Those who could be saved were prioritized. You are not critical. Elias's fists clenched at the words. Not critical. To them, she was just another name in a report. But to him, she was a life worth everything. She's a child, he said sharply. You call leaving her behind mission protocol? Where I come from, we call that cruelty. The leader turned his cold gaze toward him. This is not your concern, human. Lyra's shoulders trembled. It is, she said softly. He saved me. When you would not, the leader frowned. You forget who you are, little one. No, she said, her voice steady now. I remember. I just learned what family truly means. The air between them grew heavy. For a long time, no one spoke. Finally, the leader sighed and turned back toward his ship. Then stay with your humans, he said, his tone cutting like ice. You are no longer one of us. He gave a short signal, and the other Vulpines followed him up the ramp. Within minutes, the ship's engines roared to life again. Dust and wind whipped around them, and Lyra watched as it lifted into the sky, the same sky where her people had once disappeared. She didn't cry this time. She just stood beside Elias, her pendant glinting in the light. The old part of her heart that still waited for them finally went silent. Elias looked at her, his voice gentle. You okay, kid? She turned to him and smiled faintly, her eyes wet but strong. I am home, she whispered. Elias didn't need to say anything. He simply placed a hand on her shoulder and stood with her as the last trace of the Vulpine ship faded into the clouds. The air still smelled of burnt dust after the Vulpine ship disappeared into the sky. The humans watched in silence, unsure what to say. Lyra stood motionless, her golden eyes reflecting the fading trail of light. She had waited a whole year for her people to return, and now that they had, she realized they never truly would. Not for her. Elias stayed beside her, saying nothing. He didn't need to. Sometimes silence was the only kindness left. He knew that if he spoke too soon, the fragile strength in her might shatter. So he stood there, quiet, solid, unmovable, until she finally turned to him. Her voice was small. "They did not even look at me, Captain." "Not really." He nodded slowly. "I know." Lyra's tail lowered, brushing the dirt. "I thought if they saw me, they would remember. But their eyes." She stopped, her throat tight. Their eyes were cold. Elias looked at the sky, his jaw set. "Some people are good at turning away," he said. "It's easier than facing what they did wrong." Lyra tilted her head, still trying to understand human sayings. "Turning away?" He met her gaze. "Pretending they didn't see the pain they caused?" Her ears drooped. "But you didn't." "No," he said softly. "I didn't." That night the camp was quiet. Even the machines seemed to hum slower, as if the whole world was resting after what had happened. The crew spoke in low voices by the fire, glancing at Lyra from time to time. None of them knew what would happen next, but Elias did. He had made his choice the moment he found her among the ruins. She wasn't just a rescued alien girl anymore. She was family. The next morning, a signal broke through the static of their long-range comms. Tanner checked the console and frowned. "Captain, it's from the Vulpine ship." Elias's eyes narrowed. "Put it through." A cold voice filled the radio. It was the same Vulpine leader. "Human captain," he said, his tone full of authority. "You are harboring one of our own. We have reconsidered. She carries data that belongs to the Vulpine Dominion. We will retrieve her." Elias clenched his fists. "She's not property and she doesn't want to go with you." "That is irrelevant," the voice replied sharply. "You will hand her over within one rotation. If you resist, we will use force." The transmission ended with a sharp click. For a moment no one spoke. Then Tanner cursed under his breath. "They're coming back." Lyra had been standing behind them, listening quietly. Her claws dug into the metal floor. "They will take me?" Elias turned to her. "Not if I can help it." She shook her head quickly, fear flashing in her eyes. "Captain, they are strong. You cannot fight them." He gave a small smile. "Maybe not, but I can stand between them and you." The words hit her harder than any weapon. Her throat tightened. No one had ever stood for her before. Not her people, not her leaders. Only him. When the Vulpine ship returned the next day, its presence darkened the sky like a storm. This time, they didn't land far away. They came straight for the human camp. Dust flew everywhere as their landing gear struck the ground. Elias stepped forward, his crew behind him, rifles ready but steady. Lyra stood a few steps back, trembling. The Vulpine leader emerged again, his expression calm and confident. "Move aside, human. This does not concern you." Elias stood firm. "She's under my protection." The leader's ears flicked in irritation. "You risk your life for an outsider?" Elias's voice grew low, heavy with quiet anger. "You left a child to die. We found her. We cared for her. She's not your burden anymore. She's ours." The Vulpine soldiers behind the leader shifted uncomfortably. Elias's words carried a kind of truth that even they could feel. The leader sneered, but there was hesitation in his eyes. "You are a fool." "Maybe," Elias said, "but I'd rather be a fool who cares than one who abandons." For a tense moment, both sides stared at each other. The humans gripped their weapons tighter. The Vulpines raised their plasma spears. The air buzzed with the threat of violence. Then Lyra ran forward, standing between them. "Stop!" she shouted, her voice shaking but clear. "No more fighting!" She looked up at her people, tears glistening. "I am not your data. I am not your mission. I am Lyra." Her voice broke, but she stood tall. "I choose to stay with them." The Vulpine leader's jaw tightened. "So be it." Without another word, he turned and walked back to his ship. The engines roared once again, and soon the silver craft disappeared beyond the clouds, this time for good. When the dust settled, Elias walked to Lyra's side. She was shaking, but her eyes were fierce with emotion. He placed a hand on her shoulder. "You did it," he said softly. "You stood up for yourself." She looked at him, her voice trembling. "No, we did it." Elias smiled. "Yeah, we did." And as the sun rose over the wasteland, its light touched them both, the human who refused to look away, and the Vulpine girl who had finally found the courage to stay. Days passed after the Vulpine ship vanished for the last time. The camp felt different now, quieter, lighter. The air didn't hum with tension anymore, and for the first time in months, Lyra slept through the night without waking to the sound of engines or dreams of being taken away. Elias noticed the change in her. She smiled more now, though still shyly, as if happiness was something fragile she was afraid to break. Sometimes he'd find her sitting by the water tank, staring at her reflection, practicing small things, human words, laughter, even little jokes she'd learned from the crew. Once she asked Tanner why humans laughed when they were happy. Tanner grinned. "Because it feels better than crying," he said. Lyra had tilted her head, thoughtful. Then, "I want to learn to laugh more." Every person in the camp felt protective of her now. Even the ones who had been unsure about her presence at first treated her with quiet respect. She helped with repairs, sorted supplies, and even began helping the medic treat wounds with her nimble hands. When someone got hurt, her soft voice always carried comfort. But Elias knew the wounds inside her would take longer to heal. One evening, as the sun dipped below the dunes, Elias found Lyra sitting alone again, her tail wrapped around her knees. He sat beside her, letting the silence stretch between them before speaking. "Still thinking about them?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "Sometimes. I try not to, but the memories, they come back. I keep asking why they left me. Was I too weak? Too small?" Elias shook his head. "No, Lyra. You were just too kind for them." She blinked, surprised. "Kind?" "Yeah," he said with a soft smile. "You cared. You trusted. You believed they'd come for you. That kind of heart is rare. Some people, some species, don't know what to do with it." Her golden eyes shimmered. "You speak like my mother used to." Elias glanced at her, curious. What was she like? Lyra's ears lowered gently. She had fur the color of silver moonlight. She used to hum when she worked in the fields. She said songs made the soil grow faster. When the soldiers came, she told me to run. I didn't want to. I still hear her voice in the wind sometimes. Elias swallowed, his chest tight. "She sounds like someone who loved you a lot." Lyra nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. She did. The stars began to appear, soft dots scattered across the black canvas of night. Lyra looked up at them. "Do you think she can see me?" Elias smiled gently. "If she could see you now, she'd be proud." Lyra's tail twitched, and for the first time that night she smiled. Truly smiled. As days turned into weeks, Lyra grew stronger. The crew had begun rebuilding an old cargo ship, planning to leave the barren world behind. Elias often caught her watching them work, her eyes filled with both wonder and longing. "You'll see the stars up close soon," he told her one morning. "Not just from the ground." She blinked in surprise. "You mean I can come?" Elias raised an eyebrow. "Of course. You think I'd leave you behind?" Her heart skipped. "But your people, will they accept me?" He chuckled. "If they don't, that's their problem. You've earned your place." Lyra's throat tightened with emotion. "You always say things that make my heart warm, Captain." He smiled. "That's called kindness, Lyra. You deserve it." The day they launched the ship, everyone gathered at dawn. The metal hull gleamed faintly under the rising sun. Lyra stood near the ramp, her fur brushed neatly, her eyes wide with awe. Tanner called out from the cockpit. "Engines are green, Captain." Elias turned to Lyra and nodded. "Ready?" She took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Ready?" As the engines roared to life, dust swirled around them, golden in the morning light. The ship lifted slowly, rising above the world that had once been her prison. Lyra pressed her hand against the window, watching the horizon shrink. Below, the desert stretched endlessly. Above, stars waited like old friends. She whispered softly, "Goodbye, old world." Elias stood beside her, his reflection faint in the glass. "You're not running anymore, Lyra. You're going home." She turned to him, a tear rolling down her cheek. "Home?" He smiled. "Where people care about you, that's home." Lyra's ears lifted slightly, and she nodded. "Then I already found it." The ship broke through the clouds, into the black sea of stars. The blue light of distant worlds shimmered across Lyra's face. For the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid. She wasn't abandoned. She was free. The stars stretched endlessly before them, an ocean of light and darkness. The hum of the ship became a familiar song, gentle and steady like the heartbeat of something alive. Lyra spent her nights at the viewing deck, sitting cross-legged, her tail curled around her legs, eyes wide with wonder. She had dreamed of space before, but never like this. Now every glittering star felt like a promise kept. Elias often joined her there. He'd bring 2 cups of warm synth tea, hand her one and sit in quiet beside her. They didn't always talk. They didn't have to. The silence between them wasn't empty anymore, it was peaceful. One night, Lyra finally broke the silence. "Captain," she said softly, "do you think there's a place for me among your kind?" Elias smiled faintly. "You're already one of us." She blinked, unsure if she believed him. "But I'm different. My fur, my voice, my ears." "Yeah," he said, nodding. "You're different. That's what makes you special. You remind us what it means to care." Her ears flicked shyly. "Humans are strange," she murmured. "You fight, argue, make mistakes, but you still keep trying." He chuckled. "That's what being human is." Lyra looked at him thoughtfully. "Then maybe I want to be a little human too." Elias's smile softened. "You already are, Lyra, in all the ways that matter." As weeks turned into months, the crew grew closer than family. Lyra had learned to help in the engine room, fixing pipes with her small, clever hands. She learned to cook with what little they had, laughing when her food turned out strange. She even learned to read old human books that Elias gave her. Her favorite was The Little Prince. She said it reminded her of her mother, someone who believed in stars even when the world was cruel. One evening, while everyone was asleep, a sudden alarm echoed through the ship. Red lights flashed along the walls. Lyra jumped up, her fur bristling. Elias's voice came over the intercom. "All crew to stations. Unknown vessel approaching." Lyra rushed to the control deck. When she arrived, the screens showed a shadow moving fast through the void, larger than any human ship. "Pirates," Tanner said grimly. "Looks like they picked up our trail." Elias's eyes hardened. "Everyone brace. We're not running this time." Lyra's heart pounded. She knew fear well. It had lived inside her for years. But this time, she refused to let it win. She stood beside Elias, hands trembling but steady. "Captain," she said, her voice shaking, "tell me what to do." He looked at her, pride glinting in his eyes. "Stay with me, Lyra. That's all I need." The pirate ship sent a message. "Surrender your cargo or be destroyed." Elias pressed the comm button. "This ship carries no cargo, only people. You'll get nothing here." A cruel laugh echoed back. "Then we'll take your lives." Blaster fire ripped through space, shaking the ship. Sparks burst from the ceiling. Tanner shouted, "Shields failing!" Lyra's mind raced. She ran to the console, her claws flying over the keys. "Captain, if we reroute power through the engine coil, we can push them off balance for a moment." Elias glanced at her. "Can you do it?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Then do it." She tore open a panel, wires sparking under her fingers. Smoke filled the air, but she didn't stop. Her fur singed, her hands burned, but she held on. "Now, Captain," she cried. Elias hit the throttle, and the ship surged forward. A blast of energy erupted from the rear, striking the pirate vessel. It spun off course, colliding with an asteroid. When silence returned, everyone just stared. Then Tanner let out a breathless laugh. "We're alive." Elias turned to Lyra, who was sitting on the floor, exhausted, her hands shaking. "You just saved us all," he said quietly. She looked up, eyes glimmering through soot and tears. "Did I do good?" He knelt beside her, smiling. "You did more than good. You proved what humans always say. Heroes aren't born, they're made." Her ears lifted weakly. "Then I'm a hero too?" He nodded. "You're our hero." Lyra smiled, tears sliding down her cheeks. "Then maybe I found where I belong." Later that night, after the damage was repaired and the stars returned to their calm glow, Elias and Lyra sat by the viewport again. "Do you regret it?" she asked softly. "Taking me in?" He shook his head. "Not once. You reminded me what humanity really means." She leaned her head against his shoulder, her voice barely a whisper. "Then maybe humanity was never about being human. Maybe it's about having a heart." Elias looked out at the stars, his voice quiet but sure. "You've got more heart than anyone I've ever met, Lyra." Her tail curled gently around his arm. "Then I'll stay by your side, Captain, as long as the stars shine." And so they drifted onward, one human, one Vulpine, bound not by blood, but by choice. In the vast silence of space, they found something the universe often forgot: that kindness once given can change worlds.